Okay, guys, so welcome back to the channel. Pretty sure if you take a look around, you're going to recognize everybody. Once again, the Smart Recovery Roundtable is back, and we're going to move on. We introduced everybody in the first episode. If you haven't seen that, take a look at it. Last time we talked about going through building and maintaining motivation. So today we're going to move on to point two, which is, shouldn't do that being from England, but hey, point two, which is coping with urges. So I want to just start off really basic. I've got my own way through doing my work with DBT and schema therapy, but I know in Smart Recovery, we do talk quite a bit about urges and how to cope with them. But I want to talk a little bit from you guys, like when people come into your meetings, do you have a specific way of defining what an urge is? If there's a difference between an urge and a craving? I know when people come in, they talk about urges, and we've got different ways of, obviously, we're going to explore that. But how do you define what an urge is, and if there is a difference between an urge and a craving, like how do you deal with that inside of your meetings?
Well, SMART defines urges as like scratching an itch, like you get poison ivy and you want to just scratch it because you know that it'll feel better for the moment. But then when you scratch it, it's going to bleed and you can get scars and it'll take longer to heal and all this stuff. And so it's like then you just put, your oatmeal lotion or whatever on it and you wait and it gets better. And it's like, that's kind of what an urge is. Like you just like if it's alcohol or if it's a behavior, or if it's a substance, whatever it is, it's like you want it and you want it now, but it's like, okay, can I, surf out this urge? Can I wait? Can I prolong? Can I delay? And just like put it off and then eventually, hopefully, not do it at all.
Yeah, and urges are obviously for anybody that's coming into trying to live a recovery lifestyle. Urges are very, very prominent in the beginning, right? So, um, you know, validating people that are experiencing those things and giving them some skills to work with them. Does anybody else look at urges in a specific way inside of their
I,
meetings, or?
I kind of look at it similarly, but a little bit different. For me, a lot of it, the way I like to explain it is there's often, thoughts of use and thoughts of going back to old behaviors. Um, but when it becomes an urge, for me, is when I've started to almost start to make plans to use. When I start to have that, like, oh, well, I've got a couple hours before anyone's going to be around. I could probably get away with. Then that's when those thoughts are starting to turn into something a little bit more dangerous. And that's when I need to actually use a tool or practice some form of a distraction, some way to get away from those thoughts. And like how I would describe a craving is almost like those romanticizing thoughts that often come up when I'm thinking about, like, oh, I remember that time being with my buddy and we did this and that, and wow, that was such a good time. Um, it's kind of romanticizing the old behaviors. But yeah, that's kind of where I always go with it, the way that I lean with urges and cravings. I
So
like
like
to
the
be
thought
aware that
process
there's
that people are going through, like that kind of
Yeah, and I like
making
to be
plans.
aware that there's a big difference between actual, efforts to use
Hmm.
and just having a thought of, wow, like I get done mowing the lawn. It often happens where I get done cutting the grass and I'm like, man, a beer would be really good right now. But
Yeah,
that's where it ends and that's where
yeah,
it stops. So
yeah,
that doesn't really define an urge to me.
yeah.
Um,
So when you're starting to make the plans is when it becomes more urge like.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I think
For me,
sometimes, yeah, go
oh,
ahead,
sorry.
Pam. Yeah, go ahead.
Um, for me, the difference between a thought and an urge is like urges are physical for me. I feel
Hmm.
them in my body, like it's like a visceral reaction, like wanting to do something, whereas I can just like have the thought and dismiss it sometimes. So I think for me, that's what the difference is.
So you put urges down as being more connected to the like the physical side of it, like there's
Hmm.
this kind of physical drive that you've got an urge to do something. Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, cool. Anybody else?
Um, I'll kind of explain the difference between urges and cravings from my personal experience,
Yeah.
because I think we have the definition down. So I remember one time I caught myself, I was having a craving. I wanted a drink. This was before I found Smart. Um, and I didn't want to. I'm just like, I don't want to do this today. I don't want to do this anymore. But it almost felt like my body was on autopilot,
Mm.
leaving the house, walking to the liquor store. Like that was a like an urge. Like I was almost letting the addictive brain or whatever you call it take over. Um, and so I remember walking to the liquor store, not being able to stop myself, and that's when I got on my phone while walking and
Yeah.
looked up Smart and got to my first meeting before I hit the place, right? Whereas cravings for me now, or when I was early in recovery, they're more like just got home from work. This is my usual routine. I crave this. Or if you're used to having one, I'll be honest, I used to be the type of person that would wake up in the morning and as soon as the stores open, I'd walk there, right? And so the first couple days you do it, you're just like, I really want to walk there. It'd be nice, but no, I'm not going to do it today. You just stay at home. It doesn't physically take you over, is what the difference for me, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tried to make sure I had something left over, but never seemed to be able to do that for the morning. So I know what you mean by
Yeah.
that. Aaron.
I would just say, like, I like what Jody was saying about urge surfing because for me, I can't really remember the last time I had the urge to use, but I get the urge to do things that don't coincide with living the life I want to live on a momentarily basis. So
Yeah.
I had the urge to want to hit somebody recently, right? They had said something that activated to me, and there was this urge. I want to smack this guy in the head right now.
Yeah.
And it was physical. Like I could feel the tenseness in the blood rushing, and it was an urge though. It wasn't like, I think of a craving is more of when I'm sitting on the couch at 8 o'clock and there's a part of me, it's like, I want a cookie. And I get this craving for a sweet and I start to salivate. And once again, it doesn't coincide with living the life I want to live because I know if I eat a sweet at 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to wake up at 2 in the morning and not be able to sleep. So, but what do I do in both of those senses? I like to surf it and recognize that this is happening right now. What else can I do? Which maybe it's have not a carrot, but I like last time it was a cashew, which is still a treat, but not as sweet and won't wake me up like the other stuff would. And when it came to wanting to hit the person, I didn't respond really is what happened. I kind of just my way through the conversation and then tried to figure it out in hindsight, like what was going on, like why was I getting so activated by it. Was disgust really. I was getting really appalled by what this person had to say. And there was some fear there. But yeah, in both cases, I guess it's just recognizing that it's occurring and not allowing it to impulsively take over my behavior in that moment. So, but surfing it is a great way to go about it for me.
Yeah,
And
there's a couple of you that have mentioned that now, right? I think two or three of you mentioned the term surfing it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I know that's something that gets talked about quite a bit in smart recovery meetings. What does that mean to surf it?
I like to think of urges. I talk about this in my meetings. I like to think about urges as waves, like it comes in waves. Like, because some people say, "Oh, I've had urges for 2 days." Well, no, you really have like multiple urges over the 2 day period. So like it comes up and it crests and it's like really intense, and then you can then I surf it. Like when it's really intense, like I'm like, okay, I can handle this, I can do this, and I get through it, and then it subsides, and then maybe it comes back and then you surf it again. It's like comes in waves like the ocean. So that's what I mean when I talk about surfing the urge. When it gets really intense, just kind of riding it out, accepting it, like, okay, I'm having an urge. I can get through this. It's not terrible. I can get to the other side. It's just that idea of just like surfing the crest of the wave.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anybody else look at it any differently? Urge surfing.
well, it's just to piggyback on what Joe said. It's kind of like a coaching way through it. I'm coaching myself through the emotional experience that's occurring in an internal way rather than reacting, I guess, outwardly. Because, and also there's some distraction, like Jody said, like, is it 2 days? Well, if I'm going to focus on it and only think about that, but if I find other things to do, then, if I get into a disagreement with somebody, as long as I'm staying on that and looking for other conversations to talk about that specific, that I'm probably going to be thinking about. But if I decide to go do something else for a little bit, that's going to pull my thought away from that act, that thing. And sometimes just doing things, distracting. And I'm not saying, and this is where Stephen, I wanted to point out is that I find the smart tools are used in sense in tandem and at different times. Like we talked about deads. distract, escape, avoid, delay, substitute. It's a great tool and not something I want to do for 2 years of recovery. I personally, that's why I go to the other groups, is to try and learn, why is this need in me to always need to distract? Why do I feel the necessary need to always escape? And be able to, I guess, be able to sit comfortably in boredom at times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because you've got to, even when we talk about it from to just kind of bring the similarity to what we talk about inside of DBT skills training, distract and avoid is something that is obviously a very important skill for us to learn how to do that in a healthy way. And at the same time, that being part of the distress tolerance module. Distress tolerance is short-term solutions. They're not the long-term solution. So, a very similar philosophy to what we talk about inside of dialectical behavior therapy. That's why I love smart recovery and connecting it with DBT, because there are a lot of similarities there. So DEDS is a tool, though, that is all about distract, avoid, escape, and attack. If I remember rightly, it's been a while since I've done my smart recovery stuff. Attacking the urge and things like that, right? There's a few A's.
Attack,
Yes.
accept, avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's
Deny, delay, escape, attack, avoid, accept, distract, and then substitute your thinking.
got that one down. So, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, how does that show up inside of your meetings when you get somebody coming in, they're talking about an urge? How would you introduce the DEDS tool to them?
I often go ahead, Jody.
Oh, I was just gonna say I like to introduce the DEDS tool as like a planning ahead type tool, like because there's the DEDS worksheet, and I like to tell people to fill out the DEDS worksheet when you're not having an urge. Like, plan out how you're going to delay, how you're going to distract, how you're going to attack your urge. Like, plan it out. So when you do have an urge, you can go to the worksheet and say, okay, this is what I can do right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm a huge advocate for planning for things. So,
Can I piggyback on that?
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I like the urge jar. I like to introduce people to that. It's similar. It's the distract, but what you do is you write different activities and you throw them in a jar. When you get an urge, you pick out the activity, and then you're like, okay, I have to do this instead, and then you do that, whatever it is. And it's been really helpful for my own personal journey. So
So when you're away from those urges and those cravings, when things are going quite well, you make a list of all these different things that you can do. Put them on a piece of paper, put them up in a ball or whatever, like fold them up, put them in a jar, and then whenever you experience that urge, you go to the jar, open it up, pull one of them out, and then you go and do it. That's great.
Exactly. It's like the accepts list, right?
Very similar, yeah.
I think alongside that too is it's not often mentioned in the coping skills, but the vitally absorbing creative interests. When I'm looking for a distraction, or if I'm looking for a way to escape that discomfort, I find that my vitally absorbing creative interests are a great way for me to do that. And for me, that's, it's not necessarily like, I have a hobby of playing a video game or something like that, but that doesn't exactly absorb me, right? My vacky is crafting. I like to craft with wood and things like that. So that's what works for me. And for me, that's something that will take, I'll be down in my basement for an hour and a half and not even realize it. It's like I blink and an hour and a half goes by, and I'll realize, this past hour and a half, I haven't thought about anything other than the activity that I'm involved in. And it really helps me to stay more present and aware in the moment. And afterwards, I can then look back and go, okay, this was a great experience for me. And I think the DEDS tool allows people to kind of brainstorm and come up with these ideas that lead to these other things, such as the urge jar, the vackies, different activities that may be available to distract or allow you to escape from a situation. So that's why I agree with what Jody said, that the DEDS tool is a planning tool, and it's very useful in that way.
I think you make a really important point there as well, though, Thomas, in the difference between like everybody needs to in the beginning distract and avoid to some degree when we're dealing with these urges. And at the same time, there's a big difference between an effective and an ineffective distract and avoid, like one that's healthy and one that's maybe keeping you trapped in that addictive mindset, like recognizing the difference between, like you say, video games or crafting. You know, for me on that list would be I love playing guitar. So, you know, I would just pick up the guitar and play. And like you say, I can lose myself in that for a really long time. And if there is some kind of urge or craving that's taking me away from living the life I want to live, it's past by that time, right? So you make a really good point there. You also mentioned something that I think is probably, I don't want to say one of the most important, but something that is incredibly important, which is brainstorming. What's your guys' take? I've got a very specific take on brainstorming from the DBT perspective. So when you're talking about it inside of smart recovery, what does that mean to you guys?
Do you mean in terms of the dead stool?
Uh, whatever way it shows up for you, because brainstorming is a very okay. So in dialectical behavior therapy, brainstorming is a part of what's called the problem-solving process. So, and it specifically involves reaching out to people and talking to other people about the problem that you're facing to get different ideas. Does it flow the same kind of way in smart recovery, or do you have a different approach to brainstorming?
Well, I use it in my meetings. If somebody in their check-in, has a problem or is dealing with a craving or an urge or whatever it is, I will say, is it okay if we open this up to the group to get feedback?
Yeah.
So, then we can have some crosstalk in the meeting, and hopefully people have suggestions or tips on how they dealt with whatever the problem was that the person is dealing with. So, yeah, brainstorming different ideas from other people during the meeting is definitely important, because that's really what makes it a meeting, is getting the feedback from everybody, and the crosstalk is so important.
Do you ever find that there's like a rigid point of view that people are holding on to though inside of those spaces? You know, they've got like a particular perspective, and you try brainstorming it with others. And you know, I always think the only thing I'm bringing to a brainstorming conversation, if I'm open to it, is being open to other people's points of view. But then sometimes you can get into a brainstorm, or you think you're in a brainstorming conversation, but you've got this rigid perspective that's like, nope, I know my way of looking at it is right. Like, do you ever find that inside of your meetings?
It happens at times. People don't want to take the suggestion, or
Yeah.
they just, like you said, see it one way, they see it in a rigid way. And there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
We that's outside our hula hoop. We can't control other people, so we can only provide the way to get the suggestions. So
Do you ever, just in general, do you ever like set up a brainstorming conversation, or do you just let it flow naturally and see how it goes?
I let it flow naturally from the check-ins. I used to like take all the topics and that people would bring up, and um, like save it for after check-ins. But now it's like I I make it more organic during check-ins, like right when the person is checking in, I say, "Is it okay if we open it up to the group?" And
Yeah.
then it makes it more organic. And then when we finish that topic, I move on to the next person's check-in. So that's the way I do it now.
Yeah. What about role playing? Do you guys ever get into anything like that inside of your meetings? I know, again, not to keep bringing it back to DBT, but planning ahead to build mastery can often be a skill where we do some role playing with people to try to figure out what might be effective for us to do in different situations, rehearsing specific conversations. Does that ever come up in any of your meetings, or?
I can say for
Yeah.
me, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amit.
No, no, Aaron, you first, please.
Okay, I was going to just say for role playing, it's not exactly how you've described it, Stephen. I've never really done a plan ahead to build mastery, but what I do sometimes is ask people, and I don't know if this is considered role play necessarily, but I'll ask them what they would say if it was me sharing the information that they just shared with me to them, and they would give me some great words of encouragement, and I'd be like, all right, so now what are you saying to yourself?
Yeah.
and it's very deprecating. I'm like, so let's try and flip that. Let's try and next time we're talking to ourselves, let's talk to ourselves the way you were just talking to me.
Yeah.
Right. Like, let's remember that. Like, because, and it is, they'll say something along a simple line like, I had a lapse. And then they'll follow it up with, I think I'm stupid. I'm pathetic. I can't get this. And I'll be like, hey, like, let me ask you, if you knew that I had a year under my belt and I just had a lapse, what would you tell me?
Yeah.
And they give me some great words of encouragement. I'm like, so flip that.
Yeah.
And it really is interesting how we talk to ourselves sometimes versus how we would talk to someone else. And just,
Yeah.
I think by hearing that, I hope it helps people talk kinder to themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Amit?
Yeah, so tying deads and role playing all kind of together. What I do in my meetings is we do like a lapse review. Like in Smart, we treat lapses as learning experiences. And so as Jody said, we try to do tools, to plan out certain situations. But if you have a lapse, let's figure out why, right? And so we'll go through the deads tool again. We'll be like, did you try this? What happened? And when we get to where the failure point was. And
Mm.
so, for example, if I have someone at a meeting who said, so and so, offered me a drink and I felt like I couldn't say no. And so I'd say, okay, that's fair. That happens. What could you have said? And then we
Yeah.
bring in the whole group and say, if you've been in that situation, what have you said? Um, and so I think, yeah. And so the next time they're in a similar situation, they know what to do. They're never going to, or probably not going to lapse from that same exact situation again. And if you do that enough times with different failure points, then you're pretty much covered. You
Yeah.
get so used to using the tools in different situations. So that's how we kind of bring it together in my meeting.
Yeah. That's really cool because you're dealing with the emotional reaction in those situations and getting people's opinion on different things that they can say. Yeah, it's really, really good idea. Anybody else do role playing in any way or
Well,
I
I
was
think
gonna
that we're
go ahead,
go
Thomas.
ahead.
I think that where like brainstorming and role play come in handy is it's just another opportunity that's available to us to practice, right? And we're practicing in a safe space, much like when doing working the deads tool when you're not in an activated moment.
Mm.
Um, that's at a point that I'm in a safe space that I can practice my deads tool. The same thing goes on when I'm doing brainstorming or role playing activities in a smart meeting. I'm in a safe place. None of these people that I'm talking to are actually trying to get me to go back to behavior, but we're practicing. We're taking the time out of the day or out of the moment to practice these skills where I otherwise may not have that option except in the real thing.
Yeah.
If the only way that I ever get a chance to practice is by walking into a bar, well, I'm just kind of setting myself up for struggle. But
Yeah.
if I'm practicing these things in a meeting, it's a much safer environment to practice them in.
Yeah. Not a great idea to put yourself in those kind of situations, right? Let's go practice the skills. I'm going to walk into a bar and see how I deal with that. Yeah, that's. Jody, you were going to say something there?
I wanted to piggyback off of what Amit said about using the dead tool to review a lapse because,
Mm.
like, um, in my meetings, if somebody has a lapse, we'll quickly go through an ABC, and the activating event would be, whatever led them to the lapse, and then the consequence would be the lapse. Then we try to figure out what the B is. We try to figure out what the should. Where's the should? Like, and then the D, we dispute it. Is it true? Is it logical? Is it helpful? And then we try to get to the E, that the effective new belief would be what they could do if they come to a similar situation in the future. And we can use the ABC, you know, for emotional upsets too. Like if we're having an emotional upset that makes us have urges to use or behave in a certain way, we can do the ABC exercise to try to keep us from lapsing. So you can use it in both ways.
I think when I first stepped into doing smart recovery, which is a long time ago now, the ABCs was probably the skill or the tool that spoke to me the most.
Me too.
Um,
Yeah.
it was a tool that really got me to look at um, the fact that I wasn't reacting to the activating event. I was reacting to my belief about the activating event, right?
Right.
It's like, yes, there is the activating event, and then there is the consequence, so the A and the C. But it's the belief about the activating event that leads to the consequence, not the activating event itself. And this was like, yes, where has this been when I first
Yes.
started looking at it from that perspective? Do you guys find the ABCs to be a powerful tool, a tool that you use quite a bit, or like?
David, can I just say to what you're saying there? For me, when I was shown the ABC the first few times, I did exactly that was, and then somebody showed me how to turn that B into an A. So, for
Mm,
example, I had an activating event of being interrupted, right? And it was like I'm getting activated every time people interrupt me. Okay, what's the belief in the middle? Well, that people aren't listening to me. They don't care what I have to say. Okay, so you have a demand that people should, and I was like, what? And they're like, well, if you're getting activated when people aren't listening to you and caring what you have to say, that means you're probably carrying a demand that they should listen to you. What happens when people don't? Right. And I was like, oh my God, hold on. So I started doing what you taught was this downward arrow exercise. And it landed me at a place of abandonment and defectiveness, is really what it was. It was like, wow, is that what's happening? Then I brought it back up to the surface. And it's like, is that what's happening when Steven says, hey, Aaron, I just wanted to interrupt you for a second? No, it's not. But the story that I'm tying to that thing, I was only able to discover by applying that tool and really digging deep. But I will say that this is what I love about Smart. The tool can be used in so many ways. You can do an
yeah,
ABC right at the top, get to something, and some people are happy with that. Other people really do want to focus on that B and dig deep into it and find out what is the real belief,
yeah.
because it's not in my case that you don't care what I have to say.
Mm,
Although I did recognize, wow, I do have a demand that people should care what I have to say. And then it's like, well, what happens when they don't? What does it mean if they don't?
yeah.
And it was like, that's where, yeah, you're right. Like, and I will say though, it's not a tool I'll bring out on meeting number one with people for the most
Mm,
part. I like to start with a hierarchy of values or a cost
yep.
benefit and debt. And once we've gotten some months under our belt and somebody's willing to, if you will, poke at the bear a little, let's do an ABC. You know what I mean? Let's try and figure out what's causing that consequence to keep coming up, which may be I keep wanting to drink.
Yeah.
Every time XYZ happens, I get activated to drink. There's a consequence. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I just want to throw it to me. It is, yeah, it's a very cool tool. It's very deep rooted.
There's always, whenever you've mentioned the fact that you've got this story about being interrupted a number of times in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you do that, there's always a part of me that just wants to interrupt you as soon as you start speaking. Gotta be honest.
I'm sure you're not alone because I tell that story. I'm sure. Man, hey, Aaron.
So what you're saying is,
Yeah.
Pam, did you want to look like you wanted to say something? Then sorry.
I wanted to talk about the ABC tool. When I first learned how to do it properly, I did one every day for 30 days in a row.
Really?
Um, yeah, I've challenged myself to that, and it really shifted the internal narrative, on what I was thinking about. And I wrote my effective new beliefs in this little book here. So
Nice.
then, whenever I caught like a repeat negative self talk, I could go to that book, look it up, and be like, okay, this is the disputation for that thought. Let's remember that and use it as like a coping statement. So that it was really helpful for me.
Yeah, because sometimes people don't go into the D and the E, right? We understand
Hmm.
the activating events, we get to figure out what the belief is and recognize what the consequence is. But then going into that dispute of the irrational belief, that DIBS skill,
Hmm.
DIBS tool with, and then what's the new effective belief afterwards? Um, People sometimes don't go into the D and the E, so that's really good that you've got that list of disputes.
Hmm.
Do you use
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, Pam actually inspired me to do the same. We were kind of doing them at the same time.
That's great.
So, yeah, and I didn't have a little book, but um, it really helped me integrate the process of the ABC in my brain. So I can do them if I have an activating event. I can like kind of do it in my head now. I
Mm.
still write them down at times, but I don't have to do it every time. So,
Do you think that's because of the repetition of doing it for the 30 days straight, like constantly doing it over and over again?
yeah, it integrated the process in my brain. It kind of made me really look at the belief and the story that was behind the consequence of the way I was feeling. Because like the consequence is like a feeling or an action, or and it's usually a feeling that leads to an action most of the time. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's like, what's the story behind why I'm feeling this way?
Yeah. In my early recovery, I used to use ABCs to work with my anger, because like most of the consequences that I was experiencing was anger, and then an outburst of some behavior, some action that I would take as a result of that anger. So that was that 9 times out of 10, that was the consequence I was doing ABCs for, right? Then going back and looking at what was that activating event, and then recognizing that it's not that activating event that's making me angry. It's my belief about that activating event that's making me angry. So let's do some
Mm-hmm.
work around that, right?
Stephen, I actually didn't find the ABC very helpful to me
Okay.
when I first started Smart, and I think obviously we have all different types of people, but with an ABC, if someone's new to Smart, when I was new to Smart, you could have done an ABC on me, and we could have come up with a effective new belief, but it wouldn't sink in,
Yeah,
right? It just
yeah,
wouldn't.
yeah,
It takes a while to sink in. It's sunk in now, but it took a while, and so I'm more of the type of person where I do something a bunch of times, and then I can change my belief. And some
yeah, yeah,
people change their belief, and then they're good with their actions. So, for example, like when I was newer in Smart, I couldn't change my belief, but what helped was like the deads tool, right? It's very practical.
yeah,
And then once you do it enough times, you're just like, wait, why was I even doing this before? Why was I drinking before? Why was I doing this before? And then you're kind of like, huh, well, I like it better this way. And that kind of automatically creates the new belief. So I think there's a couple different ways of going about it.
yeah,
Like
definitely.
Aaron said, it's I wouldn't bring up the ABC in a first meeting or even the first few meetings.
Yeah,
Um, let's get them to stop what they're doing a number of times, and then they themselves will have the evidence for that new belief. Does that
yeah.
make sense?
Oh,
Okay.
100%, man. It's the same, it's a very similar process. Again, not like I'm a DBT guy, right? So it's a very similar process in DBT. We're recognizing that ABCs and things like that probably belong in what in DBT we call emotion regulation. So before we get to that, we really need to focus on what's happening with the distress, like the overwhelming stuff that's happening, because if you can't handle the distress and you jump into working on the belief, all hell's going to break loose. So we've got to first build that kind of foundation, the new way of thinking, how to distract and avoid in healthy ways. So yeah, totally makes absolute sense the way you're describing it. Anybody, how else
Can
do
I,
you
can I,
use?
what I want to throw out to what
Yeah,
Thomas was saying, I just, this kind of goes back a little, but I hope it's helpful, is
yeah,
when Thomas was talking about vital absorbing creative interest, I had a participant kind of point out to me, because I used to, on a whim, I'd say, listen, it's just a clinical way of saying hobbies, guys. And I would keep going. And he called me out and he's like, listen, Aaron, there's a reason they chose vital absorbing and not the word hobbies. And it's not just because they like acronyms. And I was like, all right, well, he said, well, think about it. There are things that are more vitally absorbing
yeah,
than just a hobby. And,
yeah,
and I, and he was right, because I can do like a puzzle while I'm watching a movie and listening to a smart meeting, right? Or like Thomas said, I can hop on a video game and I can ruminate.
yeah,
Even though I'm playing the game, I'm still thinking about the stuff that's been bugging me. But
yeah,
when I'm painting or I'm writing, I can't have music playing. I'm not thinking about other stuff. I'm 100% focused on this one activity. And I said, like, for instance, when I started doing crochet, when I first started, I had to learn how to tie knots. And even now, if I'm starting a new knot, I'm really focused. But once I know it, I'm watching a movie while I'm going. You know what I mean? But for that first little bit, it's vitally absorbing. So to find those activities that we can actually call vitally absorbing and not just something I'm going to distract myself with, because even though I'm fishing, let's say, I'm still going, fuck, I wish I had a beer right now. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like we
yeah.
got to find that thing that's really going to take us away from that thought and entrench us. So I just wanted to say that.
No, it's a really important part of the process, right? We can the way I like to look at it is that we can distract and avoid in extremely ineffective ways. I often talk about learning how to sit with emotional experiences means actually just, imagining yourself going through those difficult times where those emotional experiences come up for you. And the most important thing about going through that process of learning how to sit with big emotions is that once you've sat with it for a period of time, you get up and do something that's effective after you've done that, to teach your system how to deal with that emotion in a healthy and effective way. What I used to do was sit with emotion, and then as soon as I'd sat with that emotion for like 5 minutes, I'd get up and eat a bowl of ice cream. well, that's probably not the best thing for me to do when it comes to learning how to sit with emotion and then deal with it in an effective way afterwards. So finding those things that are really absorbing, that actually, get you into the moment. And there's a certain amount of mindfulness that goes with that as well, right? Being in the moment when you're being absorbed by those activities.
I think that even another level to it as well with the Vackies is there's a lot of similarities between learning something that I'm passionate about, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I'm absorbed into this activity. I love it. It's something that I do really, you know, um, passionately. I just keep cycling words, but um, as I go through things, there's going to be little hiccups, right? There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be little things that go wrong, or maybe something that I didn't know, and then then I have to go through that distress tolerance to figure that out and learn new things, much in the same way that I do with recovery, where I'm being taught all these new skills, and I got this thing that I'm dead set. I want to be sober. I want to get into the next chapter of my life, and then I stumble and I have a relapse, and now I've got to sit down and learn, and next time around I can be better at it. And it's the same thing with what I do when I'm crafting and stuff like that. I mean, you're only going to cut yourself with a saw one time before you go, okay, I need to learn a better way to do this. And much in the same way with recovery, I go to a concert or something like that and then relapse and I go, oh, well, maybe I need to learn better skills before I try that again.
Yeah,
And now over time, I've learned better skills and I go to concerts all the time.
yeah.
But I find there's similarities with them, and giving myself more time to practice teaching myself new disciplines, it translates into other activities in my life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you do you ever get people coming into your meetings that, and if you do, like, how do you deal with this? That say, okay, I understand that you're telling me that I've got to create these different vackies that I can use, right? These vitally absorbing activities that I can participate in, but I haven't got a clue what they are. I don't know what to do. Right? I don't have any of those in my arsenal. Like, do you ever get people coming in and saying
David,
things like that? Yeah.
so my crochet story is one that I tell people, and you're smiling because I think you know
Yeah, I
the,
know
the
this story.
story. And so I share that with people. I tell them, like, basically what had happened is, long story short, is I went to an event thinking I was going to play croquet with people, and when I got there, it was a bunch of old women knitting together, and I was like, "Excuse me, is there a croquet tournament happening here?" And the lady's like, "No, there's a crochet event happening here." So I'd obviously misread what I was going to that day, and because I was already there, I was like, "Well, F it, I'm here." And I sat down and I learned how to crochet, which when I left, they gave me 3 balls of yarn, a set of needles, and I I still crochet to this day. I do macrame now. I tie flies. I do all kinds of stuff because of that moment, I ask myself, what else am I saying hell no to?
Yeah.
Or,
Great
like,
point.
well, and that's in that moment, it was like, okay, now I'm willing to at least try. And I say anything twice, because the first time, let's be honest, it's not fun. We're learning
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
By the second time, we at least got our hands on it. It's like, okay, no, this is something I like.
Yeah.
Um, and then I just started. To this day, I have a list of hobbies that I got off the internet that I've shared in my groups a lot, quite
Yep.
often. And it's like, just pick anything and try it, give it a go. But
Yeah.
that's my story.
It's like when,
Or
when
even, oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, or even pick something that you used to enjoy as a child or something that you might want to learn about. I mean, there's so many, the internet is full of things to learn about. There's YouTube, there's whatever, Google, whatever you want to learn about. You can find a way to learn about it, gardening or like Thomas says, woodworking, like whatever, like learn how to do something new, learn a language, maybe,
Yeah.
just pick something.
There's got to be a certain willingness that's brought to and accountability that's brought to that as well, right?
Hmm.
Um, one of the things that always makes me smile is when I hear people use the yeah, but reply to doing stuff. Like you say, oh, you could try this. Yeah, but that really doesn't work for me. Or yeah, but I'm not really into that sort of stuff, right? That kind of rebuttal that pushes back against it. So I think there has to be a certain amount of accountability that we take to be willing to try those things like you guys are talking about, right?
And I'll throw to the
It's a
listeners if anyone's ever heard of something called contact juggling. It was something I was never familiar with, but if you've ever seen the movie Labyrinth, there's a scene where David Bowie's character looks like he's juggling these three balls together. And that's actually a guy who invented something that's called contact juggling. They used a double to use his hand to do it. And I went to a place where they taught us the fundamentals of how to
That's awesome.
contact juggle. It's like you move this ball, it looks like it's like a pool ball, like a cue ball, and you can make it look like it's floating by the way you move your hand. Now, eventually, you get to the point where you're rolling this thing around on your body, but it came from me going, "How did they do that in that movie?"
Yeah,
And then going down a rabbit hole of contact juggling and figuring out, "Hey, let's figure out where I can learn this."
yeah, yeah,
And
And it can
Uh,
be tough at times in the beginning too, because I know very early on, I didn't have interest in learning or doing a damn thing. You know,
yeah,
there was nothing that I was interested in doing. Um, Much like what Aaron had said, I have a list, a very similar type of list that I share with people in my meetings. That's just this enormous list of activities that you can try out. Um, and I often kind of joke, like, just print that list out and throw a dart at it and try whatever it lands on.
yeah,
Or I've heard things like the urge jar, but it's an activity jar.
yeah,
Write down as many ideas as you can come up with, put them in this jar, and when you're looking for something to do, pick it out and try it. Eventually, I think anybody can find something that they can latch onto and enjoy, but
yeah.
it does take time and it takes that willingness.
Yeah, it's getting through that dopamine crash, right? In the beginning, where that lack of motivation, that the physical aspect of it. Amit, did you want to say something there?
yeah, I just want to touch on something that Aaron talked about that I don't think it's gets talked about enough. And he said something about, something can be a hobby but not a vaccy or something,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and not just that, but you can have a vaccy that turns into a hobby. Like
mm,
for example, he brought up the example of crocheting. Like he's like, first, I was learning, but now I can kind of do it while thinking about other things, right? Um, and so there's so many things that people already do that's kind of like mindless. Like for example, I do basic cooking and I don't really think about it. I've made the same recipe a billion times, but what if you asked me to bake a specific type of cake? Like you better bet that I'm, reading this like recipe book and constantly looking back and forth. You know what I mean? It's complete, like your mind is sucked into that. So
yeah, yeah,
think of all the things that you already do and see how you can add a little um like a little like wrinkle to it that makes it feel new again.
yeah,
Um, so
well,
yeah.
Amit, to what you're saying, Stephen gave us an exercise once, which was brush your teeth with your opposite hand. And to this day, I still do it once in a while, just because it brings that mindfulness to a mundane activity. And it's like, I know this isn't a smart thing. But the whole one mindful activity
yeah,
of these mundane activities we partake in, it's like, let's mindfully make my bed, because I know I do it. So let's actually, instead of thinking about 5 minutes of daydreaming while I'm making my bed, let's try and focus and then take note. There's this term you brought up, headspace, before, Stephen. They have a thing on there, noting. Take note of all the different times my mind's going over here and over there and over
yeah,
here while I'm going through it. And like Thomas said about it, that type of preparation bleeds into my day.
yeah.
So if I can mindfully partake in those mundane activities, it really does help. It's not as, this is the thing that's kind of weird about quantifying this type of stuff, is at the end of the day, I'll feel better. And a part of me goes, yeah, but was it because we did that? You know what I mean? With a drink, it's so fucking, oh no, I know I'm inebriated because I had those beers. With this mindful stuff, it's not like, there's this direct correlation where I can say, no, I definitely know I feel now how I do because of that stuff I did before. And as a result, there's this part of me that has doubt, I guess. It's like, does it, but I know I'm going to keep doing it because it's working. But
I,
I
th-
have
I
to
think
admit,
I think that also plays into the problem with instant gratification, right?
sure it does.
When
And I
the
have that. Yeah.
when there's that tangible thing that you get from the instantly rewarding activity that you're doing that's really not effective for you to be who you want to be and live the life you want to live, but there's something tangible that you get that gives you that instant gratification. Whereas when we're going through learning these new skills and trying to do things mindfully, it's not as instantly rewarding, and there's not that tangible thing that you're actually holding on to and that goes, yes, this is the thing that's working for me right now. Right? It's slow increases. What about the physical aspect of things? So urges, obviously trying to cope with urges is we've covered a lot of the tools that revolve around distracting and avoiding and challenging those thought processes, disputing the irrational beliefs, things like that. What about the physical side of things? There's a couple of things, if I remember rightly, inside of SMART where they use the HALT acronym to look at the physical side of things, to be aware of how if we're not taking care of our physical well-being, that can lead to urges and things like that. Does that ever come up in your meetings, talking about the physical side of things?
Sure, we talk about hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and bored, anxious, depressed, and sad, and the halt, the bads. We
Yeah,
talk about all those things and how if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not eating a healthy diet, if you're not exercising, if you're not talking to people, if you're not doing things that are going to benefit you physically, like you said, your self care, then it may lead you to lapse and, lead you to whatever behavior you're trying to get away from.
yeah.
So, yeah, that definitely comes up.
It's for me, I think in the beginning when we first start doing this sort of work, and start trying to live that recovery lifestyle, the physical side of things is something that I knew I could kind of grab control of. You know what I mean? Like my thoughts and my feelings were like, woo, they're out there somewhere, and I've got very little control over those. But when it comes to the physical side of things, my exercise, my diet, like really grabbing a hold of that. It was something that I knew that if I did this, it would work. If I did this, it would make a difference. So it's something I think in the beginning that's quite important for us to talk about. Does it come up very often for anybody else, or is it not really something that shows up in your meetings?
Yeah.
We talk about sleep hygiene quite a bit in
Yeah.
the meetings, I find, because a lot of people struggle with that at first.
Hmm.
And so we talk about that quite a bit, about like, shutting electronics off an hour early and that kind of thing, meditate and all that. So,
Yeah, sleep is
mhm.
obviously there's the physical side of withdrawing from, if we're talking about substance, and to some degree process as well, that sleep is impacted, and sleep is probably one of the most important things that we need to get a grip of, because it's how we recharge, it's how we repair everything that's going on, right? So yeah, not surprised that sleep hygiene is something that comes up. Anything else that people talk about when it comes to the physical side of things?
Yeah, I find that a lot of it too is just like, any sort of physical or mental discomfort can open that doorway for urges to turn into um, return to use. And something that I often like to kind of add on to halt the bads is I call it fault the bads, adding a P to the front of halt, because pain is another thing that can often
Yeah.
lead to that discomfort, and it's very difficult to ignore pain for most people, whether that be emotional or physical.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of tools in Smart that are very helpful for emotional pain that work for not only recovery based things, but it's I think the bottom line of it for me is just keeping myself comfortable, right? Physically and emotionally comfortable as best I can, because the more comfortable I am, the less open my doors are for urges and cravings to take over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
And
to
that
talk.
takes time. Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron.
No, no, go ahead, Jody.
I was just going to say that takes time because when you quit a substance or a process, it takes time to get back to an equilibrium and
Yeah.
find that balance.
Yeah.
So it's kind of getting through that first few months to find that being in a comfortable place, and keeping that going.
I
To
think
some
being
degree, I
okay
think,
with being uncomfortable is important in the beginning, like you said. Like
yeah,
it's gonna be painful, it's gonna be discomforting,
yeah.
but you ride it out, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
To
was
some
gonna
degree,
say,
understanding that dopamine crash, I think, is really important as well. Just for me, probably the first few months, I couldn't understand where I'd got no motivation. Just really flat, really down on everything. And then when it was explained to me about the dopamine crash and how that leads to a lack of motivation, and like you're saying, Pam, sorry, Jody, that your system's got to get back to kind of processing dopamine in a normal way rather than the massive rush of dopamine that we get from the substance and the process, can be helpful to just understand that as well, because it does take time. Erin, you were going to say something there as well?
well, yeah, and to be honest, what you're saying there, I say to people in the group when we get into talking about the neurological chemicals of things, and people start mentioning things like cortisol and dopamine and oxytocin and endorphin. I'm like, listen, my experience with this isn't as mindful as some. Some people understand serotonin to dopamine. I
Mm.
just know good versus bad.
Yeah,
I know I can tell you when I'm feeling sad, when I'm feeling hurt. I can't tell you, oh no, I can feel the dopamine right now.
yeah,
Like
for sure.
it's my experience isn't that mindful, I guess. But going to what Thomas was saying, which you have a thing called, we say ASFAT, asphalt, right?
Asphalt, not asphalt. That's what it was on my website for a while
Yeah, I thought I dropped the ASFAT acronym for a
because I
second.
dropped the L.
Yeah, but with that, it's interesting because for me, it's a tool that I can use going forward or in hindsight. Like when I'm trying to recognize an activating event, I can asphalt or halt or whatever it is, just analyze. Was I feeling, lonely? Was I feeling angry at the time? Was I hungry at the time? Also, moving into a situation, I can checklist like, am I okay before I go into this, which could be exposing myself to an activating event. With that said, at times I find with people in our groups, they're stuck in a place of, am I okay to use what I'm using to help me with pain?
Mm.
And this is a weird gray area for some because what is it doing for you is a question we like to ask ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Is this still doing for me what I once used it to do recreationally or escape? And is it like when we're talking about people, let's say, have process addiction to food? We're not going to say you're going to go abstinent from food, but
Yeah.
are you eating right now because you need sustenance, or are you eating because you're lonely? Are you eating because you're bored? Are you eating because you're, depressed? Are you eating it as a distraction? And the same thing comes to somebody who's going through physical pain when they ask this question. First of all, you've always got to refer them back to their doctor and say, whatever you're working on with
Yeah.
your doctor is what's going to take. But they have this question, well, how do I know if what I'm doing right now is a healthy form of substance use? And I don't know how to give them a black and white answer other than I'll say to myself, like, I've never been addicted to opioids myself, right? And so I know that if a doctor prescribed me something like Percocet, I wouldn't feel scared taking them because I know I wouldn't get addicted to them. With that said, if a doctor prescribed me amphetamine, I would probably be asking for something else because I
Yeah.
know what's happened to me in the past.
Yeah.
But it is a weird thing when you talk about this physical thing where somebody's got to cope with, let's say, chronic pain, and the only thing that they're being prescribed is something like an opioid, and they don't know, is this is this
Yeah.
addiction? You get what I'm saying, Stephen?
I do, and I think for me, um, and I know when I first started doing smart, which was trying to think now, it's probably about 10, 11 years ago now. It's been a while. There wasn't such an emphasis on this, but it's my understanding that there is more of an emphasis on this now. I think for me, I think there's even specific smart meetings where they just talk about it. This is where the mindfulness aspect starts to come in, just being mindfully aware of the reasons why you're doing things. And that's not something that comes right away at the beginning, right? I don't think there is necessarily a black and white answer for that question. And absolutely, recognizing that the substance or the process that you're using is the solution to the problem and not the problem itself. And if you just remove that substance or process, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything's going to be great, because your system's just going to go searching around trying to find something else to cope, right? We've taken away the flotation device. Well, I'm not drowning. I'm gonna find another flotation device as fast as I can. And that's where that mindful for me, you know, there are certain things, certain behaviors that people can turn to where you're always going to be practicing harm reduction. You know, you can't sell somebody to go, like you say, go abstinent with food or shopping, because people have to shop and people have to eat. But it's the mindful awareness around why you're doing it, that's really important in those kind of situations. That's how
Well,
it should be for me.
to it, Stephen, that's where accountability and honesty are so
Yeah,
important in this journey
yeah,
with ourselves. Like,
yeah,
is that really why I'm doing it?
yeah,
Or am I doing it because I want to have a sense of euphoria? Am I trying to escape? Am I trying to know? Is it, and that's only me that's going to know the answer to that question
yeah.
in this journey, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
guys, yeah, go ahead. Who was going to say?
Oh, yeah, I think, Aaron, I was going to say something, but you hit it right at the very end. Oftentimes, in meetings, when I get that question, am I abusing this? Am I doing this? Is it okay for me? I find that most of the time they know the answer on the inside,
Yeah,
whether
exactly.
or not they're trying to avoid the reality. And, I think a lot of it is just coming to terms with it.
Yeah,
And so I try my best to talk them through that instead of like having me give the answer.
yeah,
Mhm.
Um, and I just want to touch on something about the halts and then the bads and
yeah, yeah,
the ass fat. A lot of the withdrawal symptoms from quitting, whatever, whether it's alcohol, opioids, whatever, they'll directly cause halt or some negative kind of thing where
absolutely. Yeah,
I, yeah, I get a lot of, I'm so tired because I can't sleep because alcohol used to put me to sleep. So should you
yeah,
drink to, and so in that case, I can't really fix that for them. I just suggest like, hey, just try this out. It might suck for a while, but I can't change your belief now without the evidence. So
yeah,
can you stick to this for a few days before going back to the drinking? And oftentimes after a few days, they'll see that, oh, I'm sleeping better now. Oh, I'm not waking up in the middle of the night needing to go to the bath. Like, and so just do it long enough until you see the evidence, and then the beliefs change. That's how that's what's helped me, and it took me a
yeah,
while to get to that. And so I try to give multiple options in my meetings.
yeah. That's awesome. Really good stuff, man.
That's why, like, if somebody comes into my meeting and they say they're like a week sober or 2 weeks sober, I ask them, what differences have you noticed in these past 2 weeks? And
No
I'll
matter
try
how
to make
small,
them,
right?
yeah, I try to make them think and like, oh, I'm sleeping better. And oh, I feel better. And like, because sometimes if you're like 2 weeks in, you're like, oh my God, like I can't drink, but
Mhm.
if you make them really think about what's different, then they say, "Oh, yeah, this is better."
Yeah, I'm always reminded when what you were saying there, Amit, reminds me of I used to work at Canadian Mental Health, and I always remember there was this one client that I was working with who I kept asking her to practice mindfulness and specifically just to practice mindful breathing. I kept saying to her, like, just practice it. It's all I'm asking you to do. Just let's just try it for a little bit of time. And she kept saying, no, tried it once and it doesn't work. Tried it once and it doesn't work. She kept saying it over and over again. And I kept saying it to her, like, we were like 6 weeks into the work we were doing. And eventually I said to her, listen, I'm not going to see you for a couple of weeks. So I want to make a deal with you. I said, I bet it's driving you nuts that I keep asking you to practice this, right? And she said, yeah, really winds me up. I've told you I've tried it once, but it doesn't work. I said, okay, here's the deal I'm going to make with you. I want you to try, and I need you to be honest. I said, I want you to try mindful breathing every day for 5 minutes between now and the next time we meet. And if you come back and honestly tell me that you've done it, and honestly tell me that it didn't make a difference to you in any way, I won't ask you to do it again. She said, deal. I said, okay. So she came back 2 weeks later and she walked in such a huff. And she sat down on the couch and she went, I hate you. And I said, why? She goes, because it worked and you knew it would. Yeah, I did. So, like, you're right? Sometimes we just have to try these things and see if they're gonna make a difference. All right, guys, I think we've done a pretty good job of covering coping with urges from a smart recovery perspective and off in a couple of different other directions as well. Hopefully people, when they watch this, listen to it, get quite a bit out of it. We'll be back again to continue exploring things from a smart recovery perspective on the Smart Recovery Roundtable. But for now, thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, be safe, and be well.